Receivers are generally divas, right? That's the what you
Yep,
think
yep.
of when you think of a receiver. But he was an undrafted receiver, so he had to work extra hard to make it in the league. And I think
Mhm.
that carried over into business for him. He now works in roofing, and he just had $100,000 revenue month in his first year.
Wow.
He's killing it.
Got another episode of the Constant Sports Podcast. We're diving into a company that I never had on before in the sports space, which is kind of the franchise model with athletes and building your future, building wealth, identity, specifically for athletes beyond the game, outside of the competitive nature of which is sports. And so we have Stephen on today. He's the founder of Franthlete, and thanks for joining us today, Stephen.
Thank you for having me, Connor.
I'm looking forward to it. It's a very interesting kind of niche field that you've decided to go down. So I'm looking forward to diving deep into kind of the weeds here, and especially for athletes and those trying to get into business, what it looks like, the franchise opportunities, how it aligns with their goals. Obviously, being a business owner yourself, being an entrepreneur, and what that all looks like. And so, really, just kind of take us back to the drawing board. What made you kind of choose this
Sure.
specific industry and get into it?
Yeah, I think like most of us, I wanted to be a sports agent. And so, initially, growing up, I was a hooper, wanted to be around the game as I went to college and, ended up working for a wood bat baseball league when I was in Orlando at UCF. Ended up working for the Orlando Magic while I was there as well. Got to see the Kobe, Dwight Howard showdown there in the Dwight Howard years in 08, 09. So that was definitely a favorite part of my story. But I think interestingly enough, I kind of went through that same transition that a lot of athletes go through, where it was
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, I'm starting to have a family. Maybe the sports dream is going to have to be put on hold for a bit. What am I going to do? And I just happened to get a job for a company that was a franchisor. We always say in this industry, you don't find it, it finds you. And so, I was blessed to spend 12 years with the company on the franchisor side. I got to see what it was like to onboard and support franchisees. And we also were a marketing company. So I was working with a lot of the brands you probably know and see in your local community. The Little
Mm-hmm.
Caesars, the Marco's Pizza, the Sports Clips, the Anytime's Fitness, brands like that. And, in working with those brands, I kept hearing the word playbook. They all have a proven playbook. And, it just kind of triggered my sports brain where I'm like, well, that just makes so much sense. This is why, if you're familiar with Junior
Yeah.
Bridgman and his story, why he was so successful. He's
Yeah.
a guy that didn't earn more than $2.5 million in his career in earnings. Played, I think, over 11 years in the league, during the 80s, but was able to scale and leverage that into Chili's and Wendy's locations. I think at his peak, he probably had over 200 stores or locations throughout the country. And he's
Incredible.
regarded now as one of the billionaire athletes. Rest in peace.
Mm-hmm.
Recently passed. But that story really resonated with me. I think I drew a lot of inspiration from that, and I said, instead of being a sports agent, why don't I do this? Why don't I help guys get into business when they're done playing? And that led me to founding Franthlete, and then it's
Uh-huh.
been great ever since.
Love it, love it. And as speaking on like the franchise part, just business wise, what's kind of something that most people might not understand about the franchise world from the outside, looking in.
Well, I think a lot of athletes get their start playing for franchises, right? So the teams
Yeah.
themselves are franchises. And so that's one piece. But I think most people think of food, right? You think of McDonald's, you think of Subway, and you don't realize that it extends well beyond that industry. It's obviously gyms are another one that are top of mind, but home services, childcare, education, senior care, there's just so many different vertical markets to look at. There's over 4,000 different franchises out there. We might,
Wow.
on hand know what the average person probably knows like 5 to 10. you know, there's a lot out there that we don't know. We only know what we see. So that's where
Yeah.
I come in and help guys to really open their eyes to things that aren't so much, top of mind. Not that those
Mhm.
top of mind opportunities in the McDonald's and such aren't a great opportunity. They may be, but they're everywhere. Everyone knows them, and there isn't a lot of availability left to jump into opportunities like that. They mostly have to be bought on the a resale market, if you will. So
Mhm.
there's plenty of new emerging concepts, or even concepts that have white space in areas throughout the country or throughout the world. Really, a lot of these are international brands at this point. Um,
Yeah.
and they're looking for great athletes, or not just athletes, but think athletes are a great recipe for success, being just that they're
Hmm.
disciplined and they're good leaders and they're hardworking and all the traits that it really takes to be a good business owner. Those transferable
Hmm.
skills are there.
Yeah, well said. And what does it kind of look like for athletes or just
Yeah.
individuals who trying to get into the franchise game? Like, do you go to a website? Obviously, you have your services, but I feel like people just hear like, oh, they're a franchisee, a franchisor, and then that's all people really hear.
No, it's definitely for me the most important part of all of this is that it's education, right? And I'm able to educate guys and anyone on what the space looks like and how it works. There's plenty of sites out there that'll tell you, hey, there's these brands, and now you fill out a form and then they reach out to you and you talk to them. The
Hmm.
problem with a lot of that is there's a lot of guesswork that goes into it. That you may or may not have availability in your area. You may not fit the profile for that opportunity, and you might be looking for something where you don't really want to have your hands in the business, and they're looking for an operator. So that's not going to be a good fit for you in that case. So you're reaching out
Hmm.
to opportunities that really might not be a fit. What we try to do is kind of reverse engineer the whole equation to say, okay, well, let's roadmap together what your next 5 to 10 years what you want them to look like, and find the opportunities that fit that profile, fit the investment level, and then build it from there and introduce them to those opportunities first and foremost, so that they can get a feel for what their mission and their vision is and who are they and does it feel like it aligns. If it feels good, then obviously we're going to dive deeper and do some due diligence. And we've got franchise attorneys we help align them with. We've got funding partners to help them talk through what the funding component of it is. And to answer your question earlier, is what is another misconception? I think the other misconception is that it's just going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. In an SBA loan and a brick and mortar concept, it might be 20% down and you can get started.
Hmm.
So if the build out cost is $500,000, well, 100K is still a lot of money. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but people are thinking multi-million-dollar investment, and that's not the
Right.
case.
Right.
So, and I'm a big proponent of there's plenty of ways to do more with less. A lot of times, those service businesses, you can do just as much in revenue top line as one of those brick and mortar concepts. So you might have a quarter of the investment and less risk and the same bottom line number at the end of the day. So that's part of the education that we're doing.
Hmm. I love it. And I've kind of one of my other questions, but you answered was kind of like the matching someone, an athlete,
Yep.
to a specific franchise. Do we see? I was curious. It's probably maybe not the case, but do you see like basketball players? They're more interested in whatever is restaurants, and football players more interested in salons or whatever it is. Do you see any like correlation there?
Yeah, a little bit. It's funny. I mean, I think it comes down to naturally, again, going back to knowing what you see a little bit.
Hmm.
But you know, NFL guys may be a little bit grittier. They might be a little bit more willing to get their hands dirty. What I've realized, and so
Hmm.
that's interesting. But I'm not going to say that there aren't NBA guys who've surprised me at the same time. Um,
Yep.
I think it's funny. I've got a guy who's an undrafted wide receiver. Receivers are generally divas, right? That's the what you
Yep.
think
Yep.
of when you think of a receiver. But he was an undrafted receiver, so he had to work extra hard to make it in the league. And I think
Hmm.
that carried over into business for him. He now works in roofing, and he just had $100,000 revenue month in his first year.
Wow.
He's killing it, and he was elected
Yep.
to his franchise advisory council again in his first year. So that's a really good example of a guy who, you know, people would question, well, is this receiver going to be able to get out there and get his hands dirty? Yeah, he
Yep.
always kind of had to get his hands dirty, throughout his
Yep.
career, and so that did wonders for him now in his transition.
Yeah, no, that'd be a great story there. And I was curious about you mentioned the service businesses, but where do you see kind of like the past few years, especially we've seen kind of like the wellness, the
Mm.
recovery, that those kind of like really build up and gain some steam. Do you kind of foresee that continuing or a plateau?
There are always going to be fads in this industry, unfortunately. I think we've seen it,
Hmm.
and they recycle a little bit. For a while,
Yep.
if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, it was like frozen yogurt and ice cream was the hot thing.
Oh yeah,
And then
that's a
they
good
all
one.
kind
Good
of went
call. Yeah.
away. And then now it's like crumble cookies, and there's a crave. There's just
Yep.
so many different cookie concepts, and those are the hottest thing. And they'll
Uh huh.
probably fade out too. And one will stick, and one will, kind of, they'll consolidate it, and then there'll be a winner in the space. And I think that's the same thing that will end up happening in the wellness space. I think
Hmm.
it's hot right now for sure. I love it all, sauna, plunge, and red light,
Yep.
and everything else that they're doing, IV. Those are all great things. I think it comes down to being able to adapt. It's like it's tricky. Business is funny, right? You don't want to forget the girl who brought you to the dance. I guess is an expression I
Yep.
hear a bit.
Yeah.
But in an ever evolving landscape like wellness, where there's always something new going on, go back 5, 10 years ago, it was cryo. Cryo is still
Yeah.
around, but now it's plunge and sauna and everything else,
Sure.
contrast. So, as long as you have a concept that's willing to add these new modalities, because it seems like technology is just evolving at a rapid rate, and there's going to be
Mhm.
something new, if they're able to do that, then I think they'll do well, And to further expound on that, I think there's a lot of things
Mhm.
coming in like biohacking and
Yep.
sleep
That's what I was
and
going to ask.
restorative sleep and restorative wellness and a lot of things in that space that we really haven't really got into yet that I think will probably come next.
Hmm. Well, and especially for, as you're saying, kind of the building it out and looking ahead, and athletes being kind of a good fit for the franchise model. I feel like there's kind of two camps, or maybe more, but you can expound. But so like the athletes, either kind of like the brand ambassador,
Mm-hmm.
where they're putting the money in, but then they're also like, hey, this is my company, this is what I'm
Yep.
building. But then I'm assuming there's athletes who are like want to be behind the scenes. Have you seen, one? Like I said, it probably depends, but I'd be
100%.
curious to hear your thoughts on the ambassador
Yeah,
and kind of the
no,
behind the scenes
we've
guy.
seen both. I started this company in 2019, right before NIL kind of took off. So
Mm,
since then, I solely got into this to help guys find what their next path in life would look like, and I thought franchising would be a
right.
good fit. But since then, and since NIL's taken off, now I have brands coming to me and they're saying, "Hey, well, I love them as franchise owners. That's great, but can we get them as ambassadors on the
Mm,
collegiate and national space?" So there's a couple different tiers we're working in there, but we are now helping guys to get placed as ambassadors as soon as college. Freshmen in college, these guys are making money, and I think
yeah.
what's really interesting is it's actually giving them an early kind of introduction to franchising and business ownership
Mm,
because now they're working with local franchisees and they're seeing kind of what it looks like, which is a great opportunity because we never had that before. There was always so many stories
yeah.
about guys not doing well with their money, and as much as I say the average career is 3 years, 3.5 years, and the average athlete, professional athlete, goes broke in 3.5 years, staggering
Yeah.
stuff. There's more education, more information, and now more money than ever before. But I think also the opportunity and the seeds that we're able to plant early on is going to help. So I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of really interesting things going on right now, and a lot of these deals are actually being structured in kind of I think a split, a
Yeah.
joint ambassador program or NIL deal with equity tied in, and so
Mm.
we want to be at the forefront of some of these creative deals that are now starting to take place, and we're excited about that.
Yeah. Well said. And it kind of a segue, but that was I was thinking about kind of how to structure it without giving away the secret sauce or trade secrets. But I was curious some of the structure of these deals. If it's like if it's a revenue share, if they come on more as a brand ambassador, then or more of an influencer thing, or kind of what are some ways that these deals can be structured?
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think they probably start at the influencer level. A lot of the
Hmm.
times when you're dealing with franchises, they have specific local market funds that they're able to allocate. Sometimes, if it's a brand that I think where there's a lot of really good synergies for athletes, then I think there's opportunities there where they're going to see an athlete and is going to help them to move the needle in local market sales and things like that. So some will do more than others. I think on the higher scale, maybe a national brand with marketing, might be looking to seek kind of an overarching, maybe professional level
Yeah.
ambassador, different kind of deal altogether. Higher dollar.
Hmm.
Might be some revenue share, might be some stuff tied in there, incentives tied in there. I don't know if I see that too much on the local level yet,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
but we're getting creative too. We're actually um, working on some opportunities that would allow these young athletes to get a piece of ownership on the local level, and that's
Oh wow.
way exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, especially for as you were mentioning, kind of the educational side and the financial literacy part is getting in at a younger age obviously pays dividends down the road,
Yep.
not just right here, right now.
Yep.
So that's key. And I wanted to know, maybe one lesson from I guess the sports industry specifically, kind of you've been on your journey that you apply, maybe that you figured out early on that you still apply into business every day.
Consistency, right? Everything is consistency, and you learn it as an athlete. You can't stop doing what you're doing, or it's gonna give you gaps in your, your follow through. So, yeah, consistency has always been key for sure, and staying disciplined. That's another important
Yep.
one too. But they go hand in
Mm-hmm.
hand.
Yep, well said. And then as far as new franchise owners or kind of people just getting into the game, what's one mistake you see that is easily avoidable, and then one that is might be kind of lurking in the shadows?
Yeah, I think with franchises specifically, any instrument that's cash flowing like a small business would, I think there is kind of a misnomer just because there's a lot of opportunities out there, and guys can invest in real estate, and real estate can be very passive, and they can get into VC, and it's kind of a spray and pray. They do 100 seed rounds, and they hope that a couple of them hit. You know,
Yep.
Whereas small business ownership really does take operators and people that are involved in the operation. So I think the challenge is, who's going to be operating? If they're operating, great. If they're not operating, who can we trust to operate? And a lot of times that part can make things sticky because who are you going to trust? Oh, this is my brother. I've known him forever. Well, he doesn't have any equity, sweat equity in the business necessarily. So it can get dicey, and that's where you hear the old expression, right? Don't go into business with your friends and family and things like that. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of why. It can result, in ways that, you don't want to see. But you know,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still a lot of good things. I've seen people go that route with the model though, and be successful. So I can't say it's not possible. But I
Right.
think having a plan for infrastructure and who's going to operate and how you're going to build it out. It's one of the wonderful things about franchising is its ability to scale. If you can do it in
Mm-hmm.
one or two or three locations, you can do it in 5 or 6 or 10, and in that you're multiplying your income. And so,
Right.
but in doing that, you need a team, and you need to be able to build a
Yeah.
team. And so that's where the rubber meets the road with, okay, who's going to be in there doing this? And I think
Mm-hmm.
I want everyone who can be to be as involved in the business as they can early on, because it's going to help them to learn what the ins and outs are, what they're hiring for, and what they need. I'll give you a real quick great
Right.
story. So Junior Bridgman's story, I alluded to it, was, funny thing there is most people don't realize this. He actually kind of failed in his first attempt, and it was because it was a location in the Bronx, and he was in Milwaukee, and he's kind of running it absentee. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so because of that, it didn't work, and it closed, and they had to, kind of recalibrate. He ended up taking on some locations in Milwaukee, and he was in those locations in the off season, in the drive-through, all that kind of stuff, and working the fryer, like getting his hands in it. You know what I mean? And so that enabled him to scale. You know, but
Mm-hmm.
until he was able to see that and to do that, it was a little dicey. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that, at the end of the day, a lot of these franchise organizations, they're salespeople. So they want to make a sale.
Mm-hmm.
But, what I help to do that's a little bit different is we help to ensure their success by setting them up to succeed with the right opportunities. So, I wouldn't want someone to go into a situation where it's not going to work. We'd have to figure that out, and we can help them to do that.
Love it. And I was curious if there's kind of, you mentioned like the Bronx, and I thought like maybe like cities. What are some hot spots for franchisees to go, or is it just kind of depend on the person, in the
It's
space?
it's interesting. I'd say generally there is that like political undertone a little bit, like more markets
Mm-hmm.
that support business.
Yep.
So you see that in a Florida or a Tennessee or a Texas right now. Those are very high growth areas. But believe it or not, California is a very restrictive franchise state, But I was in California, last year, and I was just amazed at how many franchises there were. So,
Mm.
I think there's opportunities everywhere, but the Sun Belt is really prime right now. But I always think cities can be tougher, suburbs are probably better, but in some concepts, foot traffic for cities and all that are ideal. So
True.
it just depends on what we're looking at,
Hmm.
what we're doing.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like it could be so depending upon the market, the sector. Obviously, COVID happens or something. There's unforeseen circumstances that
Yep.
can change some things. I was curious as we kind of start wrapping up here. Where do you see Franthlete in the next 5 years? Kind of what are some of your goals? What are some without like I said, giving away trade secrets, big projects, things like that.
Yeah, we're supporting the pro athlete community right now, so that's exciting. I think there's going to be more coming with the NIL side. Working with
Hmm.
more collegiate athletes, as I alluded to, equity deals and things like that are on the horizon. For us, we want to tell the stories. It's great that you have this platform to kind of share my story, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think even more important for me now is to share the stories of some of these athletes who have been able to make the transition and are successful in that transition because it's unbelievable, man. It's nothing
Yeah.
cooler than it. So I might get into some programming in that regards to be able to share those stories. I think that would be exciting too.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of great things happening. Obviously, a lot of tailwinds right now with sports and all of it as an equity class. But I'm in, like you said, a very niche area, but it's a lot of
Yeah.
fun. I never feel like I'm working because I'm always doing what I love. So that's where we all want to get to, man. And I'm trying to help people, find it.
Yep, perfect. I love it. I love it. And is that I was going to ask kind of for your for the listeners and viewers, maybe some parting advice.
Well, yeah, you always hear. I think you could look at it two ways, right? You're gonna have the people who are motivated by money, and
Yep.
some who are motivated by passion. And whenever you can make them align and you can do both, like then you've found a really good opportunity. So don't necessarily chase money, but be aware of how money is made, right?
Hmm.
Chase your passion, but then figure out how to monetize it. Figure out how to make that a career. And then yeah, absolutely. I think there's the sky's the limit at that point.
I love it. I love it. And Stephen, where can the listeners, viewers, potential pro college athletes find you? Find your websites, socials, everything like that.
Yeah, we're on Instagram at Franthlete. So that's at Franthlete. I'm also on Instagram at the After Sports Agent and LinkedIn and all the other places where people find themselves on social these days for the most part.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, we'll link all that stuff there. And is that the best way, kind of LinkedIn, for them to reach out
Yeah,
to you
LinkedIn
and
or
like
Instagram.
athletes
Yeah,
and things?
absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, we'll get those all linked in there. And Stephen, we appreciate you coming on today and talking about your journey, especially for Franthlete and building wealth, and really helping the athletes find their second calling. Even though, because as you said, athletes' careers are only 3.5 years, so they're out of there at 26, and it's a hard transition for a lot of them. So it's good to hear, good to see that helping bridge that gap and building that lifelong wealth. So appreciate you coming on. Like I said, and for the listeners and viewers and athletes and whatnot, make sure to check out Steven's work, his websites and stuff. We'll link him below. And this has been another episode of the Constant Sports Podcast. We'll see you guys next week.